Well, good news on the inflation front. And no, I don't expect you to do backflips or tummy tucks or whatever it is people do when they're excited, but it's good news about inflation. We were expected at 2.9%. It came in at 2.8%. So I guess your money, well, never mind, you still got poorer, but not as poor as they thought you were going to be. Joining me now, Carol Roth, author of so many wonderful books, including You Will Own Nothing. Carol, I'm super excited that I am less poor than I thought I was going to be this time of the year. So I guess that's something.
Well, Jesse, there would be no inflation, and then inflation is transitory. And I guess if you go out on a long enough curve, inflation will be transitory. So, yes, we should celebrate a little bit of good news here, a little bit of working our way back to what they think is an acceptable level of inflation. I would argue 0% is an acceptable level of inflation. I want to keep my price stability and my purchasing power. But, they feel like you shouldn't do that. But I guess the good news here is that things, at least for the time being, are working them back towards something a bit more palatable. And I say the time being because we still have a lot of issues underneath the surface, and there is going to have to be a way to deal with them, what I like to call a release valve. When they fix something over here, there needs to be a release valve on the other side to make it all balance out. And so I do think that we will expect over the next several years some sort of a return to higher inflation, or at least this kind of level being a little bit more sticky. But in terms of all of the policy chaos going on with Trump and friends, it may give a little bit more of a kick to the Fed to maybe shift their policy, move it in the direction that Trump is trying to do to get a little bit more relief. Whether any of this works is a whole other story, but that's certainly what they're trying to push towards.
Carol, what are these things underneath the surface? That sounded so Jaws-like and ominous. What's going on?
We're going to need a bigger boat, Jesse, for sure. Things like the fact that we have debt to GDP over 120%, which is an emerging market balance sheet. We have deficits to GDP in the range of 6 to 7%, which is a wartime level, almost double what is typical. Things like a very high, not in the context of history, but at least in the context of the last 15 or so year interest rate on the 10-year yield, and that reflects how much we can refinance our debt for, which is why we're now paying more in terms of interest on the debt than we are in terms of things like our defense spending, which is not really great for a country. The strength of the U.S. dollar, not again against a basket of groceries, but against other currencies around the world. That has come down a little bit with some of these machinations by the Trump administration. But there are all of these things that work in concert. And anytime somebody in the administration tries to do one thing, it potentially could be impacted by something else. So we've talked about before, you try to cut government spending through DOGE and you try to narrow that deficit. But if that leads us, to a recession, or we see the stock market come off as it has, and we get less in terms of government receipts, then it could actually end up widening the deficit, which means we have more to finance, and we create this sort of vicious cycle and potentially, wonderful things like debt spirals or sovereign debt crises or whatnot. So underneath the surface, Jaws, the financial Jaws does remain, and make sure you've got your little life vest on for sure.
Carol, what do you make of the stock market in the dips that have been having? Now, me personally, like a sane human being, I don't wake up and check it every day. I most definitely don't check it when it dips. I fire and forget. I set it off and I forget it's ever there. And I'm a much happier person for it. But I do get panicked emails and texts from friends and family. Did you see what happened today? So what does Carol Ross say about it?
Well, Carol Roth's going to take a victory lap on Jesse Kelly's show, which is, I guess, the reason why potentially I get invited back. here. A couple of months ago, we had a session together, and I warned everyone. I said that the market was overvalued and that we could see it come off. And, like I do every time on this show, Jesse, I tell you things and then they end up happening. So that was, somewhat predictable. We have a very overvalued stock market that was looking for a reason to correct itself. And Trump gave them that reason in terms of the tariffs, which I think at first the market took as maybe this is just a temporary thing. And then as they've increased, he's gone from being interpreted, seriously to literally, which isn't usually how people interpret Trump. It's usually more seriously and not literally. So I think that has been the catalyst for things to move. I think that this year is going to be very volatile. So you can see things continue to go down. You'll probably see times when it continues to go up. I think that those movements and machinations are the things that you need to be concerned about. But you never want to be the person who sells at the bottom either. And, it really kind of depends on your personal situation. So I will do the typical, this is not financial advice, but if you're somebody who is planning to retire, in the near future, and you're worried short term about this volatility in the market, that's something you should be talking to your advisor. There should be a plan in place, and you should have a diversified portfolio that accounts for having a shortened time frame versus people who are younger and have a much longer time frame to ride it out. Because I still do believe over time, given our financial situation, that there will be a bias towards things that resemble inflation or loss of purchasing power or asset inflation altogether over time. And I do think while maybe not the real value, but the nominal value of stocks will continue to rise over long periods of time. And so you want to have the appropriate hedging in place. And again, that depends on your personal risk and your situation and your time frame.
Carol, the Fed. We just had Congressman Scott Perry on. He wants to end the Fed, which sounds wonderful to me, but at the very least, he wants to audit the Fed. What say you?
So, I'm somebody who, focuses more on ending the Fed's powers than ending the Fed, because when you have somebody who can come in and make, monetary policy decisions and shift around the money supply and do all of these things that really have enabled the government to continue to spend in a very irresponsible manner, that's a bad thing. But when you just say end the Fed, then those powers remain up for grabs. And so the only thing worse than having the Federal Reserve have those powers would be if those went to Congress or something like that. So, it's a very easy way that we have to potentially control the money supply. You can have something that's tied to a proxy for growth. Maybe it's tied to growth in the GDP, and the money supply is tied to that, something that Milton Friedman called the K% rule, many, many years ago. And there are a lot of economists with ideas around that. So you don't really need the Fed for that. There are a lot of things that happen in the market that the banks could sort out amongst themselves. But the reality is, given the tenuous situation we're in, all of a sudden pulling out the central bank of the reserve currency and trading currency until we have that all settled out probably doesn't go so well for us either. So I think more oversight, auditing, maybe limiting and reining in some of their powers. But unless Congress is going to do their part, unless they're going to get serious about fixing their piece, none of this is going to matter anyway. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm not sure if there's the political will to have any of it fixed. So, well,
that makes one of us, Carol. I'm quite sure there's not the political will. So, all right, you were really, really hot about the small business issue last time. Did that ever get resolved? Go ahead and explain what that was.
Yes. So this is something that, thank you for lending your platform on a consistent basis, over the last year or so. but we had these small businesses who were being hounded by the Financial Crimes Division of Treasury to register with them, in the spirit of stopping cartels and money launderers and terrorists, because I'm sure that, all of those people were happy to register with the Financial Crimes Division of Treasury. And the fines that were put in place, things like jail time and up to $600, almost $600 a day and growing, that it was just egregious. It was just an absolute insane thing. So it's something that many folks have been working on for quite some time, including me. I testified in front of Congress about this last year. And finally, the Trump administration, Scott Bessent says, hey, we're going to step up. We're going to be a supporter of Main Street. We're going to support deregulation. And finally, they came out at the end of February that was finalized on March 2nd with a notice that says, okay, if you are a U.S. citizen or you have a U.S.-based business, meaning you don't have foreign ownership and you're not a foreign business, we are not going to force this. So even though they have not updated their website since the FinCEN website, it is on the Treasury website. And so you no longer have to do this, which is great. And this is a huge relief to small business. However, two things. One is that it has to be codified by Congress, because if this is left to hang out there and be at the discretion of Treasury, you and I both know exactly what's going to happen. When you get a different set of people in charge, they're just going to put it back in place. The second issue is that there are a lot of small businesses who have already complied, who have that information at risk for, cyber attacks or whatever it is that the government is going to do. So we need a statement that they're going to purge that data. So it's very good news. We're getting things done. We're moving in the right direction, but we cannot relent now, because we have to kill the cockroaches. You can't leave a couple in the nest, because they're just going to crawl back out again.
Amen. Gosh, I hate cockroaches. Carol, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.